Hello everyone. Have you ever found yourself laughing out loud at commercials of Centerfresh or Fevikwik? Or maybe even getting a bit teary-eyed at ads of Paperboat? What is it about these ads that really pull our heartstrings? Welcome to the very first episode of Emotional Adventures. I am Hitansh.
And I am Pakshal, and today we are jumping into the fascinating world of emotional advertising. Whether it's humor or a touching story, we are here to uncover the secret sauce behind some of the most impactful ads out there.
And we are not doing it alone. We have got a very special guest joining us today, Mr. Amit Doshi, founder of IVM Podcasts. Hi Amit. We are thrilled to have you kick off our series on emotional advertising. But before all, could you please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Amit Doshi. I started IVM Podcasts in 2015. Before that, I've had various different entrepreneurial and other stints in media and tech over the last. Started working in '97, so however many years that is. I started IVM Podcast with the idea that essentially talk radio is a major form of content in most other parts of the world, but in India we don't have that primarily because of the way radio licenses are set up. And so I thought there was an opportunity to do something over there and kind of got into the space through that.
Welcome to the show, Amit. So, to set the stage, today we are talking about emotional advertising, a technique that aims to create a strong emotional connection between the audience and the advertised product, brand, or message. It's all about evoking emotions like joy, sadness, fear, anger, or even nostalgia to create a memorable and lasting bond with the audience. The goal? Getting increased brand loyalty, positive brand associations, and ultimately higher sales.
Exactly. And there are so many ways advertisers tap into these emotions, whether it's through storytelling, captivating visuals, memorable characters like the Vodafone Zuzus, or even the music. Humor is a big one too, but so is using nostalgia or even negative emotions like fear, as we saw in the recent Tata Tea campaign that highlighted the dangers of climate change. But Amit, what role do you think emotions play in advertising? वैसे तो हमने बचपन से बहुत ads देखे हैं, but do you think the emotions shared by some of these make them stay longer with us?
So, people don't buy products, people buy stories, right? That is essentially kind of the way that a lot of advertising is kind of conceived of, especially when it comes to what you would consider emotional advertising, right? Advertising which tugs at the heartstrings, advertising which makes you laugh, advertising which makes you like angry or, can really stir it. It's emotional, it stirs your emotions, right? I think it is extraordinarily effective, but I also think that it needs to be used judiciously. If you say something too often, sometimes the impact of what you're saying can get lost, and I think that that is a danger in some cases when it comes to emotional advertising.
Very well said. As Itansh mentioned, there are a lot of ways to get into emotional marketing, and I personally feel humor is one of the trickiest yet most rewarding emotions to get right in advertising. We've all seen ads that make us laugh, but not every funny ad hits the mark, right? One brand that's absolutely nailed this is the Cadbury 5 Star with their iconic Ramesh Suresh duo. Remember the Taylor ad?
Oh, absolutely. And for people जिन्हें ये ad याद नहीं है, here's a quick refresher.
हाँ जी। रमेश सुरेश
जनाब करते क्या है?
मास्टर जी पिताजी की पतलून एक बिलांग छोटी कर दो।
I'm sure everyone listening to this could instantly recall the ad. It's a masterclass in using humor to create a memorable brand experience. Amit, why do you think this works so well?
It really kind of links product and emotion together in a way that at least one of the other ads that we will talk about later doesn't really do. And I think that so what this does is that essentially it serves multiple masters for the brand, if you will. It both also kind of creates a connect in terms of emotion creating, in terms of like associating with humor in that sense, but it also what is like the driving thing over here, right? These essentially the five-star bar. That is the thing that drives the entire ad, right? Which is not always the case in emotional ads advertising. I do believe that that's like a very difficult thing to crack. One of the best ads and one of the best campaigns just generally, right? Because it is both product, because you are talking about five stars. And see, at the end of the day, right, most of these folks are kind of hardcore capitalists, right? And they run a business, they have a P&L to make, right? So even emotional advertising has to work. The ROI needs to be there. And so this allows it to be there in a way that I think is really interesting, right? I think that it gives you both product and connect.
And while we are on the subject, there are so many other ads that have nailed humor. like Fevicol's iconic campaigns, Center Fresh's witty ads, and Mentos's clever concepts. These ads do more than just making us laugh, they leave a lasting impression.
So I think Fevicol, you're right, does an amazing job with this as well, right? Basically, because what they are doing is they're connecting product in many ways to humor and that kind of thing. Listen, this is hard, right? It's a really hard thing to get right. Just as many, like we're talking right now about a few ads that we think really made an impact. There are many, 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 many attempts at this kind of thing which don't work. You also have to take many bites at the apple when it comes to these kinds of things. Humor particularly is the kind of thing where you got to try a bunch of different things out, right, and then kind of see how it's working in that sense. So I think that it's admirable that Cadbury stuck with it for so many years, doing it, doing having humor as like at its focus.
But humor can be a bit tricky. It's all about finding that sweet spot between universal appeal and cultural relevance, right?
I mean, that's one of the that it's high risk, high reward. It's high risk of failure is there, but risk of something blowing up is also there, right? Anything can go in so many different directions. You can't anticipate every piece of it, right? But I would say that I mean, like when you're communicating publicly, that's an inherent risk that occurs. Like it's unpredictable in that sense, and that makes it even more admirable, right? Very easy for Cadbury to say, okay, hey, look at my chocolate bar, 180 calories, 200 grams. It is this golden color package. It is amazingly sweet. Ask this person what they think of the taste. Very easy to do very pure, focused product advertising, but that will not lead to the kind of outcomes that they are hoping for here.
True that. And when a brand strikes the perfect balance, just like in the case of Cadbury 5 Star, I think there is a lot of potential of creating a lasting impression.
Speaking of lasting impressions, emotional responses in ads are a huge factor in advertising effectiveness. There's a research paper which I can recall, which shows that ad evoked emotional responses significantly influence how we evaluate an ad after viewing the ad, and that shapes our attitudes towards the brand and ultimately our intent to purchase the product.
So I mean, like humor is just one thing, though, right? Like I mean, like I think there are lots of other emotions that also come into play when it comes to these kinds of things, right? Like since we're talking about tricky things, right? Google pulled off a particularly tricky ad in terms of how they were able to make the India-Pakistan cross-border ad function. I think you know what I'm talking about here.
Thanks, Amit, for mentioning this amazing ad. For those who might not be familiar, the reunion ad tells the heartwarming story of two childhood friends, one Indian and one Pakistani, who were separated during the partition. Through the power of Google's search engine, the granddaughter of one of the friends is able to reconnect them after decades of separation.
So, Amit, what do you think is the secret sauce here? Is it the nostalgia factor or is it the compelling story which made it so successful?
I think they're very effective when they work, right? But they're also they can come across as extremely self-indulgent. Google's that particular ad, right? The reunion ad across border one, that one worked phenomenally well. The great thing about the Google ad as well, right? I think like similar to the Cadbury ad in that sense, is Google showed you integrations of so many different products, right? You had Google Meet and you had flight search and you had like Google search just generally to find the man in Pakistan, right? And then you had like all these different Google services were kind of integrated into how the ad worked out, right? And I thought that was really cool. I think it was just a very well made show. It was a story, and coming back to what we said earlier, right? Stories become the most important thing, right? The story was extremely relatable and super well told.
Speaking of storytelling, attention spans are shrinking, especially with today's content consumers. Do you think storytelling is still the way to go? Isn't it challenging to smoothly land a longer and in this fast paced world?
I mean, the idea that attention spans are going down, I don't know that I 100% agree with that. I think that they are to, I think what is happening is that as people, we are consuming more and more content. Now, a lot of the content that we are consuming is being consumed in short form. But I don't think that there is necessarily a decline in the amount of long form content or in the concentration or people's ability to see that, right? Number of tickets sold for movies is going up every year. Those are long form contents. Netflix subscribers, Amazon Prime subscribers, Hotstar subscribers going up every year. Cable is coming down, but these other corresponding things are going up. So I just think it's more content being consumed. So the average length of the content is definitely coming down because you're watching Instagram reels or TikToks or whatever, right? Those kinds of things. Even YouTube shorts and YouTube smaller videos and stuff like that. Like the video I was looking to watch today was a 3-minute video with a 6-minute ad in front of it. right? So I mean, like, there is a sense of more and more of these kinds of, like, shorter formats being consumed. But I don't know that longer form. Like, again, uh, I think that it has to be good, right? I think that it has to be moving. It has to be, it has to grab your attention, right? Like that Google ad grabbed your attention from the first second.
So, there was this research paper which I came across which talked about how we can gauge the impact of such emotional appeals using the stimulus organism response framework. It explains that external stimuli influence an individual's internal state or organism, which then leads to a specific behavioral response. This ad is a perfect example of how the right stimulus, in this case an emotional story, can positively affect the organism, in this case the brand identity and brand trust for Google, and ultimately lead to a positive response, which is consumer loyalty in our case.
Exactly. And it's these kind of ads that go beyond just selling a product. They create a narrative that resonates with people on a personal level. But now, let's shift gears to an ad that uses a different emotional trigger: fear and urgency. And for that, I would like to talk about Lifebuoy's Help a Child Reach 5 campaign. For those who are unfamiliar with the campaign, it portrays a touching narrative of a father in a rural village of India who walks with a handstand to a temple to thank God when his son reaches the age of 5. It's only towards the end of the ad that we realize the child's survival is in jeopardy due to preventable illnesses. This twist not only invokes fear but also a deep sense of urgency to act. Amit, how do you think the narrative structure of this ad contributed to its impact?
So the Lifebuoy ad in particular, right? I think that the thing about that, like the other two ads that we're talking about, right? Those were product ads, right? Lifebuoy's ad was an advocacy ad. It was a different form, if you will, right, in that sense. And I think that if you're trying to do advocacy, this is kind of the way that you have to do it, right? You have to create like some sense of problem solution or fear resolution, right? You have to, that is necessary for advocacy, right? And I think that that's why it's a very interesting ad in that sense, because uh, both the other examples that we're talking about, right, both are purely product, right, even though they are using emotional advertising tools. Whereas in the Lifeboy case, it is definitively more advocacy. This ad is not being made for the Lifeboy consumer. This ad is being made for policymakers. It is being made for people who control CSR budgets. It is being made for people who can be volunteers in this kind of a system, for this kind of an initiative. It's being made for a very different sort of person, which I think is very interesting, right? I think that that's a extremely kind of smart way to use the principles that we're talking about in terms of emotional advertising. So ROI does not mean that you don't have a social conscience, right? I mean, you do have a social conscience, and you try and kind of work with that. But I find it really kind of interesting that this was their the the outcome that they are looking at over here, right, is one which is not one of like, hey, let's make sure that we're selling more soap in XYZ locality. I thought that was really cool.
Since fear and urgency are not usually correlated with positive impacts, I can think of the valence arousal framework, where valence refers to the degree of pleasant and unpleasant feelings, and arousal refers to the intensity of emotions. The Lifebuoy ad is very high in arousal, but extremely negative in terms of its valence. And this is a textbook example of how powerful emotional triggers can drive action and influence consumer behavior, even though they are negative emotions.
Finally, Amit, as you have been working in the podcast domain for a long time now, how do you think emotions play in the podcast advertising? Do brands try to tap into emotions while creating podcasts as well?
Podcast advertising, generally speaking, is storytelling. So one of the key differences between podcast advertising and radio advertising, right? Radio advertising is about a spot. It's a 10-second, 20-second, 30-second, 40-second spot. It might use principles of emotional advertising, but it's a spot. Podcast advertising is typically done via the host who is hosting the show. So the audience who is consuming already has a connect to that person. I'll give you an example. We did a campaign for a pet store company called Heads Up for Tails on Cyrus Brocha's podcast. Cyrus says Cyrus is a big supporter of animal rights and dogs and stuff like that, a big dog lover. And so every ad that we did had a story of Cyrus talking about a dog. And I think that that leads to a certain kind of connection in a way that is very difficult to replicate. Most of these ads that we saw right now play into ad slots, whether it's digital or television or what have you, right? Whereas these kinds of ads, the ones that you have on podcasts, because they're being done by the person you have come to listen to, or watch in the first place, I think that kind of leads to a deeper impact. And it also allows us to do a lot of product stuff in here as well, right? We talk about product a lot in podcast advertising, but we always try and couch it with humor. We always try and make it something where there is some additional incident or something being mentioned in that.
Well, that brings us to the end of our first episode, and I think we are in a very comfortable position to say that today's ads are more than just commercials. They are stories that connect with us on a deeper level. And that's why these ads stay with us long after we have seen them. And as you said, it's the stories that sell, not the products. A big thank you to Amit for sharing such valuable insights and for taking out time to come on this podcast with us.
All right, cool. Thank you. Thanks.
And thank you to our listeners as well. We hope you enjoyed the first episode of Emotional Adventures. Stay tuned for the next episode.